Well, we've moved away from the coast we introduced you to at Tralispean itself, and we've moved back up onto the land area to the margin of a big freshwater reed swamp in the present day, which is just below us here. And the tsunami wave, we think, came out through this location where we're standing. And as it carried across into the reed swamp and eroded that reed swamp away, then it deposited behind it here sands which had brought up from the beach environment and the offshore zone, and deposited those sands in this location. And we can see the sands in the present day quite clearly, and we'll look at that a little bit later. But the reason we found this site at all is not due to coastal science, as it were, but it's from the local landowner, Richard Henderson, who's here, who was interested in the site here, which is essentially part of his land. So Richard, how did you find the site?
Well, I found the site because I thought it was the most beautiful place in the world, which it is. You access it across the Phragmites reed swamp there, which is a magical thing in itself. And then this field, I don't have all three fields, but we have this one, was completely covered with hawthorn and whitethorn scrub and sort of natural woodland, so I didn't want to disturb it. But eventually, in creating some small sheltered gardens using the original plants, I discovered with the aid of a digger that the sand, I always knew there were 3 sandy fields, and this was one of them. That's folklore and naming, but when we dug this field with a proper JCB, I found the sand is almost 2 meters deep, and once you go underneath the surface sand, which is coloured with a bit of humus, it's absolutely virgin, pure white sand. And that, I thought, gosh, that's an amazing find anyway. But then I looked at the sand more closely, and I noticed that it had quite a lot of entire or partially broken marine shells in, so it was clearly marine sand and not glaciatic. And
we have some examples of those just there on the rock.
There. And so then I thought maybe you would expect those things to have been crushed, but many of them were intact, so I wondered whether they were sort of swept here. And then further up there, when I was also building some terraces for the garden, I found some enormous submerged rocks actually in the sand, with sand below them and sand above them. So I thought to myself, well, how did the rocks get there, and how did the sand get there, almost 20 meters above sea level? And I was getting more and more suspicious that something had happened of a fairly catastrophic nature quite a long time ago. But not that long, but some time ago, because there were also land snail shells and things also mixed into the sand, perhaps signs of the vegetation or wind blowing. Anyway, all these things made me extremely interested. And I happened to be sitting opposite Robert at a wedding. And I said, you don't happen to know anybody who's interested in coastal sedimentation in West Cork, do you? And he said, I'm your man. It was a pure coincidence. I've for many years wanted somebody to come and have a look at these sands. And so I suppose those things really, the presence of these big raftable rocks, which are sort of wider, and also they seem to be from marine origin with sort of softened edges, not the ones that have sheared off the vertical depositions here. And the presence of these entire shells, plus the depth of the sand, I thought this was a very, very interesting place to look at. And at the altitude of the sand above sea level made me think it couldn't have been all happened by wind. And if it had happened by wind, how on earth do you blow a 2-ton flat rock into the middle of the sand? So something must have happened. And so Robert's been investigating it with his grad student Abigail Cronin, and that's where we are now.
Exactly.